welcome. Thank you for joining. Thanks, Brooke, for that. Can everybody see my screen? Just making sure that we're good to go here.
We
Yep.
gotcha.
Cool. So thank you again for joining today. So kind of as we get started here, just wanted to give a quick background on who I am. So I'm Chris Wilcox. I work at Hartford Funds, which is the mutual fund division of the Hartford. There, I'm director of digital marketing automation. Just to give background on kind of where I am from a Marketo perspective, I do have my MCE. I was a champion last year. I'm a champion again this year, kind of a full stack Marketo specialist. And I've only been a Marketo user for maybe 3.5 years or so. Just to give you an idea of my background, my links here to connect with me on LinkedIn and also the community. I'm super active on community. You've probably seen me around there quite a bit. Jules, I don't know if you want to give your introduction as well here.
Yes, cool. Sorry, my cat's just decided to jump on my lap too. There you go. So yes, I'm Jules James. I am a senior manager of marketing operations at Blue Prism, who are a robotic process automation company. So it fits hand in hand with actually doing marketing automation with what they do. I have used Marketo for 7-ish years now. I've been a champ for 6 years, I think. Certified expert for just as long as well. So same thing, I've been playing around in Marketo for quite some time. So if you ever want to connect any questions, obviously always feel free to kind of hit me up on LinkedIn or in the community.
Cool. So just going through kind of what we're going to talk about today. So today, obviously, we're talking about velocity, so scripting. So first, we'll talk kind of an introduction to velocity, what it is, when to use a velocity script, when it makes sense to do that versus other opportunities. Then some tools of the trade and kind of best practices, kind of as you get started or before you get started, just kind of some baseline understanding to kind of help you get up and running more quickly. And then specifically creating and testing your tokens. And then we'll go through some use cases because there's a lot of this is somewhat technical in nature because we're talking about code and script, but when you really get into the practical, use cases and examples, it really starts to come to life. So just diving in here, what is velocity scripting? I think there's been a lot of chatter, and I've had a million people come up to me and say, I hear a lot about this velocity thing. I don't really even know what it is. Well, velocity is a coding language. It's built on top of Java, but it's just used to script content is really all it is. So in Marketo, you can make use of it by creating these tokens, and you can place them into your email assets. So either in the body of an email, or you can put script tokens in like the from name or the from email element or things like that as well. Velocity can read and access fields on the contact object. So, your people fields, if you will. Can also look at opportunity data and some custom objects depending on how they're integrated. But basically, it can read all these different elements. So you can use this to kind of create more advanced logic than you otherwise would be able to with something like snippets or segments or things like that for dynamic content. So the long and short of all that is that it's a coding language that we can use to create dynamic content that's more detailed than snippets and traditional dynamic content. So it's a little more technical, but much more powerful. And the most important thing is it's not that scary. I know it seems super intimidating to a lot of people to say, I don't like code. I work with my developers whenever we have to get into that stuff, but it's not that bad. I mean, it can go down a crazy rabbit hole. I will super caveat it with that. We can do some really powerful things that probably are above even my head for sure. But us marketers can take advantage of it too, just by kind of having some basics covered of how to use it and what it can do. So when might you want to use a velocity script token? The simplest one that I think of is if you need to reference, multiple attributes on a contact record. Here's a really, really simplistic example of, you want to combine a gender field and a last name to create a single token that creates, hi, Mr., Mrs., Ms., whatever, plus last name. You can do that. That one you can do with segmentations probably pretty quickly, but, if different fields, maybe not so easy. Or hiding or showing content based on user preferences. So you want a particular piece of content to show up in your email, if they're located in a specific region. You can code that so that it will show or won't show depending on what the user's record looks like. There's a really good piece in community that Beth had written about tokens versus snippets versus dynamic content. I have a link in here, or we have a link in here that you can take a peek at. But that really does help kind of break down when it makes sense. it usually is case by case. So that's a good piece of content to go down. But in many cases, at least in my opinion, velocity can be a lot easier to maintain and keep it at scale compared to segmentations or snippets. Mostly because like if you're going to use 2 or 3 attributes on a given contact record to make a segmentation, all of a sudden you've got, a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen segmentations you need to create content for if you're doing it that way. Whereas velocity can kind of handle all of them at the same time. So it's just a different way of thinking about things. And as we go through here, as Jules and I go through here, like anybody has questions, feel free to chime in and ask questions as we go, if that's easier too, because we're definitely looking to have a conversation if we can. So just some upfront limitations. You can't nest script tokens within script tokens. So you can't reference, like, can't make one token and then put it inside another one. So just kind of understand that. You kind of got to put them together. And the other one is you can't put a script token inside a snippet or dynamic content. I think that's true. Someone, Sanford Whiteman tried to argue with me that that's not true, but it is totally true in my experience. So I don't know if anybody else wants to. Jules, I don't know if you have comments there, but that is my experience.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done it, and I don't think I'd ever want to, because you're going to run into all sorts of issues with it tracking and working correctly.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't compile right. Like when it goes to send, it doesn't actually work right. So stay away from that. So just a couple best practices. Hold on, let me open the chat so I can see. We're here. There's a couple tools that I want to talk about just as we get started here that really are about the editor. So the first one is, obviously Marketo has its little kind of pops up editor that you can use when you create these tokens, but in my opinion, it can be a little finicky. You kind of have to always be online, so if your network cuts out for a second, anything you're doing kind of gets lost along the way. So personally, I work in an offline editor. I use Notepad++. It's really straightforward. It's just a plain text editor. You can edit HTML and stuff in there too, but the only downside to doing that is you need to look up your field names, and when you're going to reference, you want to talk about someone's first name or something, you don't know what to call it. You have to go back to Marketo to get it, but to me, it's just a lot safer to use an offline editor. This is just my personal opinion here. The next thing to be aware of, so Marketo doesn't maintain a history other than what date a token was last updated. So just something to keep in mind as you build these out and you maintain them. That I like to keep an offline archive. So I just have a folder where each of my tokens lives on our network drive, and when we update them, we make a new version, and then we overwrite it in Marketo, so we kind of have this ongoing history. And we also document changes right within them. So you'll see that there's a way to kind of comment out and add notes right in the context of your logic for your code. And it's just the best practice to do that, so you can somebody else can pick it up, without you having to be there to walk them through it, to kind of understand what the script is doing and how it's supposed to work, so that if someone else is picking up your work, it's easier to do that. The only other thing, it's definitely advanced, but just to be aware of, is that Marketo fields and Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics fields, they all get converted to strings when they're in velocity. And all that really means is, like, if you want to do greater than or less than or some kind of mathematical equation in your token, it looks like text first. You just need to convert it to a numeric value before you write your script. So I don't even know what use cases there are there, but I just kind of wanted to make everybody aware. If you want to do field 1 plus field 2 equals whatever, you got to make sure you convert them to the numbers before you do that. The other thing I want to talk about quickly is where you create your tokens. So where you store them matters. So tokens can be stored in Marketo activities folder, or in a marketing activities folder, or at a program level. And then that token you create is accessible to all subfolders and programs below wherever you create it. So you can see, like in the example here, if I put a token in my Chris Wilcox folder, everything below that can read my token and use my token. So there's just some thought here of, like, is this a token that we want to have use broadly or globally? Make sure you put it in the right place to start with. Or is this kind of a program specific build, and we want to make sure it kind of lives within that program specifically so that everyone else doesn't see it all the time. And the only other thing is if you modify a token in like the child folder, so in this example again, if you opened up the token in the very low, like, automated batches folder, it'll create an override version of that. So just be aware, because if you override it there, then everything below that gets your override version. It gets complicated. Just manage it wherever it says local. You'll see when we get in here in just a second. And with that, I will hand it over, Jules. I'll stop sharing, and you can take over and drive from here about building script tokens.
Thank you. Let me just get my screen shared. So what I just want to do before, can everyone see my screen first? Can they see the script screen?
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I just wanted to just start off with just kind of talking through different things that you need to be aware of when you're creating a token, especially when it comes to velocity scripting. And then I'm going to go, you can probably see Marketo in the background. I'm going to go into Marketo and actually build a velocity script token. It's going to be very, very simple. But it would just be one example of a way in which you can use velocity script and then show you kind of what it looks like in an email with the benefits of being able to do these features and reasons why we'd want to use velocity versus segments or snippets, etc. So when you're building tokens, especially with velocity, is actually not, as Chris said, it's actually fairly simple. It's the whole kind of premise of if this then that, and you'll see that when we start going through what some of the code looks like, you always start with if. So if this field equals whatever we want it to equal, then we want to be able to populate the information that we want to put in there. So if you start with the if this then that information and kind of start writing down how you want that script to look or what you actually want that script to do, it will be a lot easier when you actually start building it out. Because if you try and start building it without really understanding what you want that token to do, what you want that velocity to actually kind of display at the end, it makes it much more difficult to build it. So think about, you always start with an if this, and I've lost my mouse, there is. You always start with an if this, and then if you want to have additional settings or features or additional information displayed, you can then use that else if. So this is where the kind of if this then that starts to come into place. So if you have a record where their country is United States and their state is California, then show one piece of content, whereas if their country is United States and then their state is Texas, show a different piece of content. You can use the else if as well. So if this, then that, or if this. So it kind of the else if is more, it's really hard to say. It sounds, it gets a bit complicated, but the else if is very much or that. So if this or that, or if this then that. And then obviously if you have the else as well, which is, again, this will make sense when I show you what the code looks like, because it sounds a bit foreign language right now. The else is if, like lots of else's and ifs, is if you don't meet any of the criteria at the start, and then you actually want to move on to the next kind of set of that velocity. Now, you'll see with the way that I tend to write velocity tokens, I like to split them up into individual tokens just because of the way that I use it. I find it's much easier and cleaner to read. I don't have to worry about all the else's and the ifs, else's, and all that kind of stuff. I focus on an if and an else and an end. Like that's where I focus on. But you can build, I've seen some awesome velocity scripting that's built. They've had 25, 30 different variations of an if content A equals true, and if content B equals true, and content C equals false, show content A, content B, but don't show content C. And you can do all of that in one token. My brain capacity just won't deal with all of that code in one place. So I like to split up, and I'll show you how I do that in a sec. When you kind of start working out what you actually want that velocity script to show, when you find out what information you actually want to display in your emails, then you can start using these additional logic fields as well. So again, we're going to focus on just the very, very simple kind of if, else, and end, or mouthful. But there are some other ways you can do things. So you can use an and. So if this and that, so rather than if this, else, that. So if this and that, you can set a piece of content being shown, or a link being shown, or a first name or a last name, or a value being shown. And then you have this little 2-line example is an or. So you can use ands and ors a bit like you do with Marketo filters, especially with advanced filters. You can play around with that and say, if this and this or that, you can use the double ands or the double ampersands and all the double lines. And then you can start playing around with, do things equal a certain value? So when you kind of do like, if this equals that, then I want to show a particular piece of content, or I want to show a particular link. Or again, the vice versa, if you want to show this something is false, you can do it the opposite way around. So if first name is empty or first name is not empty, show this salutation, or if last name is empty, show first name, for example. So you can kind of start playing around with those false salutations as well. And then, so I'm just seeing what chats, I'm just seeing a load of chat messages coming up as well. Oh. Just seeing if there's any
one just came through. Hold on, one
Yeah.
just came through about not and, or not like not equal to, is how I'm reading that. Which you can basically put an exclamation point. Like you can see the difference between equals and does not equal. The only difference is there's a little exclamation point in front of the little whatever you want to call it, query.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
That's
so
what I meant.
Yeah, that's
equals to, not
figured.
equal to.
So yeah, equals, not equals, contains, not contains, just the
Yep.
exclamation point. Yep.
Yeah. So yes, you can do nans and nors in the way that Rico put it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that exclamation mark is what's gonna do that for you. And again, with the beauty of velocities, you can get really complex if you want to. Like you can start to pull all of this information into multiple ifs and ands and ors. Connotations, again, depending on what information you want to display using the velocity. Now, obviously, really think about what you want to display with a velocity token, because you can get very, very complex, you can get very simple. But think about, is this truly something we need to do with a velocity token, or can we use a snippet, or can we use dynamic content? If you start getting down 3 or 4 different variations of fields, so it could be salutation, first name, last name, it could be country, city, country, state, city. If you start getting that complex, like Chris said, you don't want to have a segment for country, a segment for state, and a segment for city, when you can actually do that in a velocity token. If it's something as simple as we want to show a certain set of information based on their country, you can do that with the segment fairly easy. You can use dynamic content, it's much easier. So you have to figure out at what point you want to flip from kind of segments into velocity. And like I said, the example I show will be when it's coming to selecting multiple events for a session, for example. So it's not so much of showing first names or last names or certain sets of content. It's based on someone's actual personal selection of the piece of content they want to receive, or the particular session that they want to attend. And, oh, if I can get my mouse to click. The cool thing about velocity tokens as well is you can actually start to put your own comments in there. And I'll show you an example that Chris has got in the deck before we go into actually looking at it in Marketo. But you can put comments throughout the script as well. So if you are giving it to someone else, if you've kind of built it, especially if you've built it at the kind of the very, very top parent program, parent folder level, you want to give someone the idea of how to use that token, then you can use the comments, you can use the pound signs to make those comments. And with those, obviously, they're not going to have any effect. Same as you do, I'm sure you've all done it in code before. So in code, you can play around and you can put different comments throughout code. You can do the same in the velocity scripting. So if you're building out some tokens at a parent program level, or if you're going to start to build out a program library of different velocity tokens and you want to give someone some explanation, you can do that as well. Just make sure you use those double pound signs or double hashtags. And as it says there, I said before we get into the demo, is just if you are using this, think of it as your flow steps, or your kind of your choice values in a flow step. They only qualify for the first if statement. So think of it as the same way. Let's say as a flow, and you have those choice steps, they'll always fit the first kind of if statement that they actually match, which is the other reason why I like doing the example I'm going to show in multiple tokens, because I'm asking someone if they want to select out of 25 different sessions, which sessions they want to attend, and then being able to send them the links to those sessions that they picked. Doing that in individual tokens means that I'm not going to skip someone accidentally or miss a session they selected on as well. So let me, I'm going to move this screen. And then
Jules, we do have a couple of questions too that are in the chat box.
Okay, let's have a look. So is it possible to use functions directives such as replace all in something like So updating something in lead note. I'm going to ask Chris that one because I've
Yeah,
never used it for replace alls.
I said I haven't used it for replace alls, but I use it
Yeah.
for other things. So you may have to write it as almost like two elements. You can, in a velocity token, you can set up like you can define variables with a quick query loop or something like that, and then use that like later in your script. It all has to be kind of contained in one big script, but like, yeah, you could write a function like that and have it output whatever you want the new value for something to be, like basically setting that variable to be whatever your output is there, and then reference that later. That's definitely more complicated than I think what we're trying to go through here. But yeah, I mean, I do stuff like that sometimes. Not quite that complicated, but similar, yeah.
Yeah.
And they asked about documentation, and the documentation exists. There's a link to it in here. It is incomplete is a nice way to put it.
Yeah, and the velocity, the actual velocity scripting documentation is not the easiest to read or understand. So like Sanford's done some really good examples, no surprise there. He's done some excellent examples of how to use velocity. So yeah, I would look at Sanford's stuff, I would look at Courtney's stuff, and then kind of take that velocity page and try and piece it all together that way as well.
Yeah.
And Jen Mobley, that was the other one that Warren's put up as well.
Yeah, Warren just asked a question about what would the use case be. The one that I'm talking about, just at a high level, is we take the way data is stored in certain fields in our CRM isn't really usable right in a script. So we actually take it and we parse it out and then use the individual attributes of the field in a single output. So like we just basically are doing some super minor data processing on the field before we actually use the data. That's mine. It's not that complex.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, I opened my chat, so I'll keep that open as well. So this is obviously, you know, what Marketo looks like. But what I want to do is talk you through the way in which I've used velocity scripting for a pretty good example. And this is something I did earlier on this year. So this was an event that happened. This was a page I built for a company I used to work for. And essentially, as I scroll down, you will see there are a lot of sessions that people could pick to attend. So there is a lot of sessions. So I'm going to keep scroll. But as you'll see on each one of these, there is a little checkbox that says add session to agenda, add session to agenda. And people could actually come onto this page, especially when it was a live event. They can obviously also do it when it's on demand. They put all their information in, and then they could come down and say, I want to attend session 1, session 2, session, I think that's 5, 7, and 9. And then when they register, what we wanted to do, rather than sending them out 7 different On24 emails, because this was actually all built as individual On24 webinars. So rather than sending them 7 different On24 emails, we wanted to find a way to be able to send them one email with just the links they needed for the sessions that they selected. So this is where kind of that velocity script came in, because this made it much easier for me to be able to say, if they register for session 1, 5, and 7, we're just going to send them the links for 1, 5, and 7. So the way in which we did that, so obviously you come into it, and I'm going to do this at the local level versus at the kind of the top level, at the parent level, purely because this is tokens that are very specific to this campaign. They won't fit anywhere else. It won't make sense anywhere else. So the simple thing, obviously, you come into your token section, you go into email script, drag it in. I'm just going to call this session 1. And then obviously click to edit, as you would normally do with a token. The difference you'll see when you do a script token is the first thing that appears down this side are all the different fields that you could be using. Now, just as a caveat, this can sometimes take some time to appear. It can sometimes take a couple of seconds. I've seen it take a couple of minutes sometimes. So I'll actually go and end up writing the code and then come back and select the field. But you must ensure that if you're using, obviously you're using a token in here, and you're using a field value, you must come into here and select that field value that you want the token to fire off. So this is our champion sandbox. I created a couple of temporary fields earlier. So you can see here, I'm doing session 1. So I'll make sure I pick session 1. And there's 2 ways in which you can start building. You can kind of drag and drop that in to make sure you see the field, or like Chris said, you can actually build it offline. That's what I did earlier. I don't have fancy Notepad++. I just have Notepad because I'm on a Mac. So I tend to build it very simply. And a lot of the times, once you've got your version of your token, you can just copy, rinse and repeat. So I'm going to grab this code that I took for session 1. And then when I put it in, you'll see how everything starts to format and appear a bit more cleaner. So you can see if, this is obviously the first thing I'm asking. So what I'm saying is if session 1 equals true, because it's a Boolean field, so I'm just using a 1 or a 0. So if session 1 equals true, then what it's going to do is basically display all of this information on the email. So you can see I've put in the time of the event, the event title, the link that we have to the event as well, any different kind of formatting and styling that we can put in here. The one cool thing about velocity tokens, which I know you can't do in most tokens, is you can add tokens within a velocity token. Because obviously this was a registration for On24 event, so I was able to add in the email token within the velocity token, which again you can't do on normal tokens, it doesn't work. So but in velocity it does. So I'm just saying, and it's very simple, like I said, if they've selected session 1, then show the session 1 information, and then I've stopped it. Like I said, I could, if I wanted to, keep putting in session 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 into this one big field. But like I said, my brain cannot calculate all that data in one place, all that code. So I'm just going to hit save, and then I get my first token. Obviously, make sure you hit save once. And I'm going to do the same thing because I put 2 sessions in here in the field. So I'm just going to put in session 2. And again, you'll see where I have my very badly uncoded, like untidy script down here for session 2. Like I said, I like making it tidy sometimes. Sometimes I just literally copy paste because I know what it's going to look like. Oh, put that in here. And then again, like I haven't gone in. If I'd have hit save now and hadn't gone into the field value and kind of check true, the token would fail. Like if it simply won't fire. So again, make sure you come in, go into person. I've got to scroll all the way down because it's a VS thing. And again, I'm doing session 2. So I'm saying here, VC session 2, VS session 2, the titles, the coding matches from when I tested it earlier. Oh no, actually I need to change this to VC. VC session.
And you need your else and end.
Oh yeah, I'll miss my else and end on the end. Thank you.
Gotcha. It won't save unless you have. Yeah. If you guys ever run into issues with, you try to approve an email and it has a script token in it, and it's like gives you some kind of crazy, it found some error. If you have a script token in it, check to make sure you have an end, because if you forget to close the script, it'll just, the loop just continues for the rest of your content of your email, and it doesn't
get
work
it
right. Yeah.
It does not get it. Let me come in here, and actually I've got to go into session 1 and make sure I change the code because it's VC session, not VS session. And again, I always double check. Like I know it once it's saved once, it will stay checked, but I always just double check that I haven't missed it. VC session 1, VC session 1, cool. And so now I've got those 2 scripts. I can basically now go into my email. And again, this is just a real simple email that was just taken from the Marketo template. So it's nothing fancy. It's not designed in any way, shape or form.
Oh, a couple questions real quick.
Oh yeah.
Kimberly asked if you're putting their specific On24 registration member URLs in there. I can also jump on this because we use On24 too. On24, it's a standard like event and token ID for the whole program, and then you just put the person's email in. So where Jules had the lead's email in the URL, that was kind of doing it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. So the one thing that we did for this particular example is I had one parent program that if they filled in a form and checked those check boxes, the parent program would basically look for anyone who had a checkbox checked. It would then request a campaign to register for them for the event in On24, and then I could then come back into where I had the token set up, and you'll see the only things you need is basically event ID and key and email address. Those 3 things, basically the On24 URL is very standard. So as long as you've got those 3 things, and like I said, that's why I use lead email, that will basically push them straight through into On24. It already knows they've registered. And it does its thing. So On24 is actually pretty cool like that. You can have that standard token built into that. And I don't know if all platforms do have that as well.
And then Gwen asked, do you have to check the tokens for any other embedded tokens? And the answer is yes there, which actually you might have to check lead email too then in your token settings, right?
No, I did it earlier. It worked. Because if I'm not using that as my my trigger up here.
But you need to check that in the integration pane, don't you? On the right there.
No.
All right, sure. What I mean, this is your token. Go ahead.
Yeah. I've not didn't do it before. I've never checked it on there before. I think normally maybe you have to, but because this is part of that URL, I don't think you have to.
Got it. Okay, maybe that's an exception.
Yeah, and I'm going to prove myself wrong now. And
We'll
I tested
see.
it earlier.
I don't know.
So it all works. So yeah, so let me just shove the tokens in here really quickly, because obviously I can't put the tokens in until I know what I've called them. Oh, go away. So let's just put in my 2 tokens, my session 2. And then because of the way that I've coded my tokens, I've coded them as tables. So that within the actual velocity itself, they were kind of built into tables. I put them all in like this in one big solid block. And like we had 15 or something different sessions. I just put them in a solid block because when they come out, they don't come out in a big solid block. They'll come out based on the formatting that you've actually put into the velocity token as well. So it actually makes it a lot cleaner than it looks like right now. So let me just prove and close that. And what I did obviously earlier, just to give this example, is I came in just into database and just checked the 2 checkboxes. So you can see that VC session 1 equals true and VC session 2 equals true. And then for this example, I did the same because I couldn't find both email addresses earlier, but you get VC session 1 equals true and VC session 2 equals true. So we can see that I've checked those 2 checkboxes. That's what my velocity script is going to look for. So now if I preview my email when it wakes up, obviously it will just start with the tokens, so it won't show anything to start with. You've got to love Marketo when it does a little circle. I'm sure we're all used to.
The spin of death, as we call it,
yeah.
at work.
So you can see that obviously at the moment it just says my session 1, it says nothing right now. So if I go and actually find myself, or if I go and find the test lead, helps if I could type. And I used test lead 10 was the example that I used. To see what appears now. So I've said that obviously I want to show session 1 and session 2. These are the formatting and the information that I put into those sessions. So now it just appears like that. And then obviously if I put in 5 or 6 sessions or 20 sessions, it will show that information. So a good example is if I come back into this one, I'm going to uncheck session 1, make sure it saves in here just to test it. Come back into my preview and let that refresh. And then wait till it comes up and then find my test lead again. So obviously this time I unchecked session 1, so I'm just showing session 2 this time, and it should just show me session 2. So based on the content, based on the information that I'm trying to show, it can bring up that information. Now this is a really good example. You can do it for these sessions, like I said, for content set, for webinar sessions. You can also do it if you're using forms that you basically want to say, we have 25 pieces of content, which ones would you like to receive in an email? You can have a form that has multiple checkboxes on there, and you can just serve up those pieces of content that someone wants to see. This all stemmed from training that, well, not training, so from some code that I learned from Revenue Pulse when they were working with a client that I worked with in the past. So I looked up the code they used for how to, like, if this and that, we do a form page at an event. We want to be able to show someone 6 pieces of content, but they may not want to download 6 pieces of content. So which ones do we want to use? Which ones do we want to show them? And then based on their selection, so yes, they want to select piece of content 1, 3, and 5, then we're going to email them only pieces of content 1, 3, and 5, because we know that's what they want to see. And seeing those open rates and engagement rates went up dramatically. And obviously things like this, so when you have a big event and you have 25 different sessions, you only want people to see the sessions that they've registered for. So you don't want to send them an email with a list of 25 things like this when they only want the ones that they've actually registered for, the only ones that they've actually had the request for that information. I think I just saw a question from
there's a couple. Yeah,
Kimberly. Where do you want to start?
You got
I'll start with the Kimberly one. So how do you avoid building a ton of new Boolean fields in Marketo, such as VC session 1, VC session 2, if you're running a lot of these at once, or do you reuse them for your next event? So yeah, I basically built, for one event, I built VC session 1 to 20. For the first session, the first event we only used 10. We had 10 sessions. For the second event, we had 20. Because what I did as part of my smart campaign is once someone was registered, as soon as they were registered, as soon as that email got sent, I put a wait step in the smart campaign and then just nulled out all the fields. So that, because obviously if you left all the fields on when they came to the next session, if they picked only session 1 through 5, but they had 10 sessions selected from the first event, they would have got all 10. So I just nulled out the fields, and I actually nulled them out within 10 minutes of them filling in the form and getting the email, sending out the email, purely just because we had a lot of instances where people would register for 5 sessions and then come back the next day and register for a couple of sessions and then come back the next day. And so we wanted to make sure they only received the sessions that they registered for at that time. So yeah, so unfortunately it meant building out a ton of Booleans, and I call them VC session because we just had this virtual conference where there was 3 of them, when you would have up to 20 sessions across all of them. You could call it content fields, temporary fields, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it was just, unfortunately, it was just a ton of Boolean fields that we just make sure that we're cleaning out on a regular basis.
And we've used it the same way with form fills, with basically a checkbox. Do you want XYZ to happen as a result of filling this out, nulling that out, and then writing the script right afterwards is definitely critical. But Kim, to your question, that's what I'm talking about with the example earlier, where we're basically unconcatenating a field that has multiple values in it. It's essentially a pick list that stores them as a single stored value. It's avoiding exactly what you're talking about, and that's because that field for us has to exist in our CRM, and our CRM admins are beyond crazy about field numbers, which they should be. That's their job. So basically, they store it as one concatenated field, and then our script pulls them apart, sends it's similar to this example, sends out what's relevant to that person, and then that's basically it. So it's stored in one place. And then Michael had a question earlier: is there a validation before you save it or anything like that? Nope. Nope.
No,
so
it just lets you save it. You'll get the error when you're trying to
you'll get the error when you try to approve or send the email. That's right. Yeah. You'll get an error for sure, but it's not right then and there. And the syntax validation is more just the color coding. When you paste in your code, there is a color coding similar to like CSS or HTML that is unique to Velocity, which you'll just get used to it, which, for example, like text is green. So if you see the second half of your token is all green, it's because you didn't close a quote somewhere, you know what I mean? Because it still thinks it's part of the value. That's really the best way to talk about syntax validation. It's not the best to work with in that regard.
Yeah. And like Chris mentioned, I missed the else if, like the else end, he saw straight away because that wasn't there. You get to learn those colors. Like I say, I know that these are kind of always number fields. When they come up in pink, you have your ifs. Again, if you've missed like certain things, you'll see things start to highlight as well. So when I'm sure you've all played around with CSS, and when you're doing your coding in any of the email or landing page template stuff, you'll see that code coming in. So you'll start to see and recognize kind of where certain bits of content are or aren't, or where they should be. Who's been building in there? Someone's been building in there. Probably Warren, wouldn't surprise me. So yeah, so that was some examples that I wanted to give. And so I know we've got a couple of other questions. I just wanted to go over some of the last kind of things in this section. So as we said at the beginning, you have to have your if statement. So make sure you obviously start with your if statement. So you need to make sure where if they meet that rule, then they're going to be able to obviously show the information you want to show them, and and you can use tokens within the Velocity script, which is a really cool feature because, again, you can't use tokens within tokens normally. So if you do want to use some tokens, Velocity scripting is definitely very helpful for that. You can use else if. So if you want to do if they don't meet this but they meet that, then we can do our else if criteria, and then obviously make sure that you have your else and end statements at the end, because if you don't have those, it's just going to keep trying to run around in circles. So make sure you always have those two at the end. Again, you can put something in between the else field. So like I could put session 1 is that, if session 2, or sorry, else session 2 is this, else session 3, you can do that. But because of the way that we had these tokens set up and the way that we had the session set up, we had to make sure they met every single criteria. So I set them up separately.
Right. And the only other thing I want to just say, and I think it was earlier in the deck too, but just to reiterate, when you have like an if, which is your first, hey, if they meet this criteria, do this thing, then your second else if, check if they do this thing, and if yes, do the next. It'll only run till they meet the first set of criteria, right, that they match for that's the output they'll get. So even if they match for option one and option two and option three, if you have 3 if statements in there, if they qualify for all 3, they're getting whatever you have as the first. If they qualify for 2 and 3, they're getting number 2, right? So whatever the first one there is.
Yeah. And I think if I go on to, I know you've got an example, and then I'll come back in a second here. So you can see that this is for that content selection that we mentioned at the beginning. So like you can do if field A equals 1, and then show this first piece of content, and then it starts a second set of kind of content if field B equals 1 or equals true. Then show the second piece of content. Like I said, you can build that, and like my event sessions, I could have built into this as well. Like I said, my brain just can't calculate, especially when we had 20 different sessions to try and get all of that into one big velocity token. I didn't want to do it, so I built them all separately. But you can, if you have like 5 or 6 pieces of content and it's fairly short script or fairly short coding, you can put that in there as well. And then just skipping back to a couple of these, again, just reiterate, make sure if you are when you open your velocity scripting editor, make sure you do check the checkbox and make sure you select that kind of field that you want to use, you want your velocity to trigger off, because if you don't, it won't work. This is an example of using kind of ifs, and this is the or statement and the and statement. So this is if we want to send out a personalized email based on someone, if they're in sales group 3 or 4 and they're from the West. So if sales group equals 3 or sales group equals 4 and region equals West, then we're going to serve up the lead owner's first name and last name. But if not, then we'll serve up the brand name for everyone else. So this is where you can use the ors and the and statement. So again, think of it as those advanced filters that we use all the time in SmartList. We can use this in a very similar way. Again, just try not to get too complex with it, and make sure obviously you are putting your else and your ands and your ifs and yours all in the right places.
Right, and that's more an example like that we use. Like in my experience, is we do a ton of personalization, but the personalization is based on when our sales team identifies someone who they'd like the personalization to happen from, and then we have other criteria that's like business criteria on top of it. What is their relationship with us? How much sales have they done? X, Y, and Z, and to make segmentations out of that is like infinite, right? From how many options there would be. So instead, we just write it as a script, and it's 2 lines of code. It's really, really simple to maintain.
Yeah, exactly. And just like even just trying to get this into having this one field here and this field as segments and dynamic content and all that kind of stuff, it just doesn't work. So it's just so
explodes.
Much easier to have.
I know. Yeah.
It's just 2 lines of code. It's so much easier. I've already talked about how to edit the token, so I'm going to skip over some of these because I kind of wanted to demo it versus actually kind of talk through some slides, because I thought it would make much more sense to show that information. And in here you can see when you're using your token code, you have to check it. Like I said, when I've used lead email address on the token on the URL for the ON24, I've never had to check that checkbox before, and it's always seemed to work. But I don't know if that's just because it was part of the URL. Where it pulled it through, it always worked. I don't know unless I did something magic and don't know why it worked. But so make sure, obviously, it says there you've got sales group, you've got region, you've got lead owner, first name, last name. So make sure you are checking all the things that are being used. Don't trust me in saying because mine worked, yours may not work. And then as I showed you,
the checkbox gives the script access to the field.
Yeah,
that's the way to think about it, right? Without giving the script access, it can't read it, and so it can't work right. Yeah.
Like I said, I have no idea how mine worked, but apparently they did.
I mean, every email gets sent to an email address. That's my other thought, is like, because Marketo is sending an email, it's probably already accessible.
Maybe it receives it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and bear in mind that those emails were going out to about just over 1,000 people, like 1,200 people registered for the events, and the registrations all worked. So something worked, but like I said, don't. Make sure you test it, make sure you check the checkboxes. And again, you can test it in the exact same way that I'd. So like I said, I had the test fields, I had the test lead. I went in and I would go and check random VC session boxes. I'd go and do like 1, 5, and 7. I'd do all 20, I'd take ones off. And then I would just use the preview to go and find my own record and see basically how that preview would change. So if it showed all 20 sessions, what did it look like? If it showed 15 sessions, it showed 5 sessions, what would it look like? Because obviously the more you can look at that and see how it's working, how it's displaying, you can then go and start making any edits to the tokens or the velocity scripting that you may need to do. Like you saw I had a lot of spacing. So if I wanted to, I start to reduce that spacing, remove some of those breaks out of the code to kind of bring it all into one format.
And another thing that just to
about,
bring up, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but on that last part about testing, like I've gotten questions a lot of, can I just send a test email? Find a contact that meets my criteria, send a test email, send it to me, but mimic that user. Technically speaking, like that'll probably work most of the time, but it's not foolproof in that the compilers are different. This is technical. This is Sandy in my ear telling me technically you shouldn't tell people to do that because it won't work 100% of the time, which is why the preview is probably your best bet. It's setting, like Jules said, set up a couple test leads that meet your criteria and then and preview them.
Yeah. Preview is your friend when it comes to velocity, because like I said, you can make your lead match that criteria. You can make your test lead match the criteria that you have. And it makes all the difference to be able to see if it's working. And then here was just my example, just in there, so you can see kind of that I picked that this is obviously VC session 1, VS session. The reason this looks different to this is I actually changed the name, but didn't change the API name after I called it VS session, then renamed it VC session, so the API name does not match the field name. But yeah, that's why it doesn't match. But again, whatever you name your field, make sure you're checking that checkbox as well. Then another couple more questions. So Warren said, to what extent is it worth knowing the basics and finding examples and just using them like I did in your program ChiMUG, Jules? I've done the same thing. Like I literally learned velocity from looking at the code that Revenue Pulse had put into a client that I was working with, their instance. I looked at how that worked and then started playing with it and seeing what can I do with it, how can I extend it. If you're just doing it in test emails and you're just playing around with it and you don't plan to use it, there's nothing wrong with just taking code examples, which is why I'm kind of we put these code examples in here, so you can take this code, you can look at it, you can play around with it. Obviously you have to understand which fields are mapped to it as well. So like for Chris's example, you can see that he's got field A, so you'd have to go and create obviously field A, field B, field C. For mine, obviously I've got like the VS session or the VC session, so I'd have to go and create you'd have to go and create all those fields to get it to work as well. So the one thing about velocity, the one thing I've learned with the kind of the basics that I know is the more you go in and play around with it and look at it and see what cool stuff you can do with it, the better. It's the same with anything in Marketo. There isn't any great like set in stone training out there, but the more you can go and play around with it and play around with that code, the better you'll be. And the more you can test it and preview it, it's definitely going to really, really help with anything you want to do in the future. And just to finish off, there's just one troubleshooting section and then just a checklist that I'm going to get Chris to run through with the checklist. So just the troubleshooting, as it said, I was quite lucky when I actually opened up the code, the velocity scripting editor. The side panel appeared straight away. I've seen it take a few seconds. I've seen it take a few minutes for that to appear. So make sure before you save it, make sure you go into that side panel, you find the field that you want it to, all the fields that you want it to reference, and check those off, because if you don't, it won't work. So as I said, there sometimes it doesn't even populate at all. So just do a hard refresh. So I was lucky that it actually appeared, especially in the new UI. I wasn't sure if it would, because it doesn't always, but it did.
And I have even had, when I put this specific slide together, I've had it before. I had, let's say, a token I was going in and updating, and all I had to do was change something quickly on the code side of things, nothing on the integration side. But I started editing that before the integrations panel loaded, and then my token won't render properly. Like, it's something very strange on the back. So I actually don't touch anything until that integrations pane loads, and then it's never an issue. So just be aware of it. Because it was it was like trying to find ghosts in a closet. I was like, what is happening? Why will this not run?
Yeah.
I literally had to like uncheck all my integrations, save it, recheck all my integrations, and then it worked fine. Like, very, very weird. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, be patient. Wait till you've got that side panel up, otherwise it just starts to screw with things. And then I'm going to let Chris finish up with our last couple of slides, which is just the checklist. Chris, you want me to leave it on this screen? I'm cool with that if you want.
This is good. Yeah, sure. So when you kind of think about, if you decide I want to try velocity, right? Like here's just kind of a general checklist of how you can kind of get started. The optional first step is get squared away with an offline editor. There's some slides that I have in the appendix of this, which we don't really need to run through, but if you want to use Notepad++, Courtney Grimes, who is another kind of contributor to the Marketo community, I think she's been a champion a couple times, created, like mimics the way the syntax like color coding works in the Marketo editor for Notepad++, and you can just download her XML, put it in as a file format in your Notepad++, and then it looks the same in both places. To me, that's invaluable. So there's instructions on how to do that if you want to in the appendix of this deck. So if you want to work in an offline editor, get that set up, easy. The second one is just writing out your logic or rules. Like Jules said, I really prefer writing this out as sentences. You know, what am I trying to achieve? If someone meets what criteria, what do I want to show them? That way you can kind of get your head around what it is you need the code to do in plain English, and then translate it into kind of velocity script. So from there, it's going into the Marketo editor and pulling out the field names that you want to use. So you know, if you wrote down a sentence, if content selection or whatever is true for this field, I want to show them that content. You know what field you need, right, to do that. So then you go into Marketo. If you drag the field into the editor, it'll show you the API name that you need to reference in your code. So now you got your names. The next part is to write your logic. So using your if statements, using your ands, using your ors, whatever they need to be to meet your criteria for your rules. And then basically that's it. I mean, you're going to have your what's your rule and what's your output. You know, if somebody meets that rule, what are you going to put in there? If it's a block of HTML, like in Jules' example, you paste in the table of code. It's just like you could grab it out of your wherever. If it's just like in some of them personalization, put the token that references the personalization element you want to include there instead. Then you want to figure out where you want to create your token in Marketo. So if it's a global program, you know, the highest point of wherever it makes sense for it to cascade downwards, because remember, every folder and program below where you build a token will have access to it. So if it's local, put it in that program. If it's global, put it as high up as makes sense. Go to your tokens pane, hit a new, drag over a script token, hit new, it'll open the editor. Once that integration pane loads up, paste your code in. On the right side in the integrations pane, check off those boxes for any fields you're referencing in that code. And then it's basically save it, put it into an email, and identify the test cases, or build your, if you have to create, you know, test records that meet your criteria, kind of create those, and then sample and preview that. So kind of going all the way straight through, it is a lot of steps, but kind of once you get into the rhythm of this, you know, you'll have a couple test records that you go in and you'll just, you know, change your values 1 and 2, and you'll have some baseline code you're probably working off of instead of starting from scratch. And a lot of this is very iterative, at least in my experience. I don't know if Jules, you feel the same way.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'll take something and be like, how do I get something to do this? And then just take code that I know I've already got and then just tweak it, because code, a lot of the time code does the same thing. So we just need to tweak it ever so slightly for if it's an additional and or if statement, or if I want to add 2 sections of questions in there, I can do that as well.
Right. I see Gwen asks, are there any issues with checking more fields than you need? I've never had an issue with doing that. My guess is that the compiler might get funky at some point. There's probably some limit to that, but you know, if you take out whatever lead, owner, first name, and you've had removed the reference to that, it doesn't break anything. So I've never had an issue with it, but I don't know the actual answer.
Yeah, I've never seen issues with it. Just as long as you've got the correct one selected that you need selected, then that's fine.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah, if you unselect the ones that you want to use, then that's when it's going to start breaking.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that is, these are resources. So again, they're all in the slide deck that I'm sure is going to get sent around. So as you said, the kind of the Apache velocity documentation is a little bit dry. It's very hard to read and understand. But using Sandy's work and using GitHub and using the stuff from Courtney and any of the discussions or the blogs that are out there about velocity are really, really helpful. The more examples of types of code that you can get, the better, because then you can just start to build up your kind of your file of different types of code that you want to use when it comes to velocity. And that's it.